and made the deliberate commitment to do something that would help move my city forward, that I really started to understand this concept of being a servant leader. And yet, as I began...
Cheryll, welcome to Unleashed. Thank you very much for giving the time. How are you today?
I'm great, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation, so I'm eager to get started. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. That's awesome. I'm looking forward to it too. So tell us a little bit about you and what are you up to these days?
So I'm a born and raised Edmontonian. I've lived here my entire life. This city holds my heart, and while I've had a number of opportunities to leave to work and live elsewhere, I've remained committed to Edmonton. And that's probably relevant then with the current work that I'm doing is I am running to be the mayor, the next mayor of Edmonton.
Wow.
And so the way I've been spending my time has been really interesting and incredible is that I've been dedicating my time to talk to Edmontonians and really understand their broad experiences with our city. And I've been doing a lot of discovery work, which I think might be a very interesting topic for us to continue to talk about.
For sure. Yeah, you sound like you're approaching it like an entrepreneur. It's like you want to find out what are the needs and what the problems that you're willing to solve. Tell me more about that. So what is it like? How are these discoveries going?
Very, very interesting because this is new and so I'm new to municipal campaigns, but there is a certain expectation of citizens that candidates come to the table already with formed ideas. And so this is brand new, this whole discovery work, this engagement work. And so typically when I start out a conversation, the people that I'm talking to are expecting me to bring all the answers, to really lead the dialogue, to tell them about what I think, what I intend to do. And I've turned that around. And yes, you're right. With such experience that I've had talking to entrepreneurs, working at Intuit in the past, I've really recognized the importance of getting to the heart of the problem that you're trying to solve and making sure that you're validating it with your users, those that are experiencing your services. So it's, I think, been surprising for many of the people that I've talked to, but once they understand the purpose and why I'm doing this work, they really get into it. And so it's been really a lot of fun and I'm learning an incredible amount.
Well, that's awesome. I'm fascinated with the idea of political work and working, serving the people. It's for me the ultimate form of entrepreneurship because you have a vision that is shared. You're serving others. You don't get quite the returns financially, though, like building a $1 billion company or something like that. How has your journey led you to this? Did you always have kind of that mentality that you want to help others? You've been engaged a lot with entrepreneurs, as I know. So how has your journey led you to this? What were the earlier starts that led you here?
Interesting that you ask that because it was only when I left Intuit and made the deliberate commitment to do something that would help move my city forward that I really started to understand this concept of being a servant leader. And yet, as I began to understand really the idea behind it is serving others. So representing others, making sure that your intention is going to represent the needs of the many. I realized that was really the culture and environment at Intuit for the 15 years that I spent there. And they were so committed to their customers. It was within our DNA. We practiced it all the time. But I never really thought of it as public service. It was customer service. And so public service is really the same principles, the same philosophy, the same love and commitment, but it's now to a much, much broader audience and a much, much broader group of individuals that you represent, but it's the same practice.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I'm not familiar. One of the things that I kind of ignorant about is because I came from I'm an immigrant. I came from Syria, Dubai, lived in Dubai, came here. So I'm not familiar with yet. I'm learning as much about the politics of Canada as much as I can. I'm interested in politics, but is a mayor a political position? Because it sounds to me that I mean, from my knowledge, it's like there's no, there's least affiliation with a party. It's more like you're serving the city. Is it the right understanding? What more can you add about that? I'm curious.
Very accurate. And while it is still called politics, it is a municipal level of government. You are an elected official on behalf of the people. It is and should be party agnostic. And so that's right. There should be nothing politicized about roads, parks, sidewalks, core infrastructure. And so that's as well why this is the area of public service that I am interested in, because I am interested in serving those that live here and providing incredible services that they experience every single day. And I'm not necessarily interested in getting into the party environment where it just does seem to be an us against them environment quite often, with the parties kind of competing. So this is definitely what holds my heart, because I do have such commitment to my city and believe in the importance of municipal government, because you are the first to serve. You are the closest to your customer, if you will.
That's awesome. You've been involved in the entrepreneurial scene in Edmonton, and I wasn't yet aware that you've actually grown up or your life there. How have you seen? Where do you see the city right now in its entrepreneurial journey from your experience, and how have you been aware? Let's say how it developed throughout the years.
We have such incredible promise, potential. We have an incredible community here, but I will say that I'm disappointed with the progress that we've been making in the last year. Let me take you back a little bit. So I
Please.
left into it, let's see now, 5 years ago, and really into it left in me this love of small businesses and the recognition of the important role that they play as job creators, as core to the community, as community members. And so when I came and committed to work in Edmonton, they were a group that I wanted to continue to serve. And so when I looked at the economic environment and the organizations that were working in that space, a lot of what was talked about was bringing big companies here instead of saying what's being created here and how do we help make them successful? Who are our small businesses? And then I went on to discover that more than 90% of the businesses in Edmonton are small and medium. That's unique. That's unique from other cities around the world that have many times a much more large population of big corporations. We're the heart and blood. Small businesses are the heart and blood of Edmonton. And so then with my technology background, built it into it, and IBM, tech-enabled companies became a very obvious area for us to focus on. How do we use technology to accelerate, to create efficiencies, to create better partnerships? And so early on in my work in the economic development environment, I founded Innovate Edmonton, really focused deliberately to say these businesses are the future, these businesses are the job creators. How do we really make sure that as a collective community, municipal government, provincial government, federal government, investors, community champions, mentors, that we were all coming together to make sure that the companies we're creating here could be as successful as possible?
Oh, fascinating.
So it was really incredible to create an organization, to really be part of the catalyst to this being one of the most important initiatives for our city. And so I remain committed to that. but we have had a pause from any of the work that the city has been doing for the past year. And so I'm going to continue to champion this economy and this group and this community in my ambitions to be the next mayor.
That's awesome. The reason I say that is because one of my pet peeves about when I talk about the innovation ecosystem and the startup is everybody says let's bring anchor companies, big companies, and I'm so happy. You can't imagine how happy I am. Even though you're coming from environments of big companies, it speaks a little bit to me that area of discovery for you, that what's on the ground is that small businesses are the biggest employers. They employ almost everyone, and it's much more sustainable to help small businesses. So that's actually really fascinating. Why do you think that is the focus, in your opinion, the focus on big companies? Is this because it's an easier, or it looks like the silver bullet that solves everything? What have you seen in reality why people push for this?
Well, let me first as well be clear to your point that I agree that big corporations and big business is important, and they are a member of the community and they are a member of the ecosystem. I think that there is the acknowledgement, very true, that these large corporations, once they start expanding, they do have the ability to hire large groups of employees quickly. And so, my background back in 2000 was when Intuit recruited me because they had ambition to dramatically grow their presence in Edmonton. And so they hired me to help construct a 100,000 square foot Silicon Valley campus-like building to house the 300 employees that they intended to hire in the very near future. So I can understand why that's an attractive target for cities that are looking really to drive the increase of jobs, to drive the economy. So they definitely are an actor within the community, but they should not be prioritized above really the companies that are being created within the city. And my observation even within Edmonton is that once you create these obvious conditions for success and you start to build a really healthy ecosystem and the community is thriving, that attraction happens actually quite naturally because the big companies see what's happening there. And look at Google DeepMind that came to Edmonton as well because they saw what was happening here. They were attracted to our artificial intelligence strengths, but also did some poking around to see what the startup community what the environment was like here, because oftentimes, and this well, large organizations and corporations sometimes acquire small companies because they bring a new piece of technology or IP or a certain type of talent. And so they see the possibility from these cities that have a healthy startup community.
That's awesome. Yeah, I completely agree. That's basically the environment is what feeds them, that's what enriches them. When you look at the business community and the startup community, entrepreneurship basically in your city, and how you interacted with them in general, where do you see the biggest challenges when entrepreneurs want to develop ideas, and necessarily where are the areas that let's say political will or the organizations like Innovate Edmonton and can help an entrepreneur move forward? Where can they be the most impactful?
That's a good question. And I think that each city is unique around where the municipal or provincial or federal government has the best opportunity to help, because it depends on their stage of evolution. Are they an immature ecosystem? Are they a more mature ecosystem? And so in Edmonton's case, we are an immature ecosystem. And so then we recognized through community engagement, community voice, collective contribution to creating a plan, was really that there was a high need for us to focus on that early stage company. And so was proud to have Startup Edmonton as part of my program portfolio. And we really recognized that they were the front door, the first point of entry for people that had an idea and wanted to continue to develop, that they could be a great navigator of this system, because it's confusing, we know that. And so that was where we were putting our best investment, was that early stage work, recognizing that once those startup companies are successful, then you need to focus in the scale up space so that they continue to grow. But that was where we were looking originally, was how do we really develop that navigation system, that front door, and helping them, connect them to mentors that can help them in their early stages.
That's awesome. What do you see as interactions from around the city? How does the ecosystem kind of get enriched, or is challenged sometimes by, let's say, the different, because Canada is, aside from the other cities, it's kind of communities that are separated by distance sometimes, and it's challenging. What was your engagement with that? How do you see that working together as ecosystems, Edmonton and Alberta, and all of the regional innovation systems that are around you?
I would have to say that my observation would be internal competitiveness. And we know that there's this large world around us, and there are other cities, companies, and more importantly, countries that are competing against us. And so for Edmonton, Alberta to be successful, we were, from my early observations, competing with ourselves a little bit too much. And so within Edmonton, for example, with limited resourcing and limited funds, there was this competitiveness within the early stage entrepreneurs who were just trying it out for the first time, and then the more experienced veteran entrepreneurs. And there was a bit of friction then about what the two groups felt they needed. Where should we be putting our program dollars? So that internal community environment and competitiveness was challenging, and it's challenging, makes it challenging for governments to know where then to help and how to help when you don't have kind of a clear ask. And then we have the reality and the gift of Alberta, where we do have two major cities within our province that's very unique. And that it was my observation that many times as well, Edmonton and Calgary are competing against each other. And that's crazy, because the two cities are unique. Edmonton is a talent powerhouse, an academic powerhouse as well, talent and academic powerhouse. Calgary brings big business, big problems, private corporations. And so the two of us together should be unstoppable. And so I think that that would have been my biggest challenge that I observed, was that rather than recognizing that the competition is outside of our borders, we kind of had a bit too much of an internal focus at times.
Interesting. When you set up Innovate Edmonton, what was it like to kind of the early days starting to get the idea going? And what was the reception like around you?
I know you're getting into some vulnerable territory here, but it's really, I think, important to share this. So one of my areas, a blind spot that I had when I entered into this role, was two aspects that no one person, one organization should believe they have all of the answers. And so I entered in to the space confident that I knew what we needed to do, and that in order to do it, we would just drive my idea forward, or the idea of a small group of individuals, without really truly doing broader validation. So I made early mistakes around that, around assumptions of what the community needed. The other thing that was surprising for me was the importance of social capital within the innovation community. And so I was an outsider. While I've lived here my entire life, really people in the community didn't know me. I had worked for a Fortune 500 Silicon Valley based company. I spent most of my time working outside of Edmonton. I had a global responsibility and a US responsibility. And so again, I kind of entered the scene in Edmonton as an unknown, thinking I had all of the answers. And that's not the way community operates. Community is about collective action. It's about recognizing that the entrepreneurs actually know what they need, not the service providers. And so, great, the community was very vocal. They let me know I was heading in the wrong direction. They definitely highlighted some of the error of my ways. And, you know, it was really, really rough for a number of weeks, but the community, I think we all came out of it much stronger. We started to become more comfortable having more difficult conversations together. We really, you know, whenever you work through hard things together and you just push through them, you come out the other side stronger. And so I reflected with many within the community about the errors that I had made early on. And we did talk about how it was uncomfortable at the time, and especially at times it felt for me, but it made us all stronger. And so it was so important to actually have that happen.
That is interesting for me, because the Brad Fell talks about like building communities when in his book Startup Communities, and how he built Boulder and worked with others, and that when you enter into something like this, you need to have like a 20-year vision, 20-year vision, because things move slower than expected. And especially someone coming from the tech industry, you're probably used to making things move quite rapidly, and I completely relate to that. And it's challenging to have others kind of like, why won't you move? Why won't you? So what were some of the key elements? I get the key trends, which is collaboration, working with people, having hard conversations. Are there any other kind of subtle things that you realize that have helped you really, or come in the way as well, that you've learned along the way? This is really kind of helpful for me and anybody who wants to build a community.
Really focusing on community, I think, is core. And so I know that was right in your question, that word, but this recognition that not everything is about business, and that you build relationships through little moments, small moments. And so I think that that's a really important reminder for anyone that is building community, that it's not just about the programs. It's not just about how you're building your company and having those types of conversations. These are hard times for entrepreneurs, and they are very lonely times. And so to know that you are not alone in that journey, and that you can just call someone up and have a personal conversation about the day that you've just had, or a very scary conversation you want to have about things you don't know, and maybe you think people think you should know, that means community. That means close relationships. That means trust. Trust is so important. And so I think back to my reflections on the way that perhaps the work that I was leading could have had better success was really that recognition of trust, relationships, community, social capital, and why it's so important when you're beginning hard work, or you're beginning work that requires the collective, really, for you to be successful.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. You're coming at a time where we cannot ignore. This is not regular time, right? COVID has changed everything. People call it the Great Reset. However you look at it, things are not going to be the same. Not only that, a lot of the small businesses are heavily affected, especially those that are not tech ready. If we live in the tech world, sometimes it's easy for us to not relate to their problems, what they need on the day-to-day basis, and how they deal with things. What are your thoughts? What are you seeing as mega trends, or trends that affecting your city? What do you see as or learning from others about the challenges they're dealing with through your discovery? I'm really curious about what you're seeing kind of bubbling up in the small business entrepreneurship outside of tech or adjacent to tech.
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? There's been a number of observations that I've had, and maybe they're unique to Edmonton, maybe they're not, and maybe you're seeing them in Vancouver as well, that COVID has really had us as a community being more aware of our ability to help others, to support others. I think that, Edmonton was one of the first food banks in the country. And so that nature that we have in our city to be helpers, to be supporters, to be community connectors is part of our DNA. And so I'm observing that in so many different other areas. You're on Twitter and you see how many people, all of the friends you didn't know that donated blood in the past. You see friends that are supporting organizations and charities where you haven't seen that before. So if that's Edmonton's natural character, I hope that this is just going to continue to create a better supportive environment for our entrepreneurs. And I believe that there will be more and more emerging within this crisis right now, because there are less people that have full-time employment, and that's tragic. It's very tragic that we have so many unemployed, but perhaps that is going to lead to more discovery and more people thinking that they have time to observe the problems that they think that they have unique ways of solving. And then the third aspect would be, Edmonton is a small town city, or small business city. Edmonton is a small business city. And so again, that's in our DNA. And so I'm really excited and hopeful for the new small businesses that are going to emerge from this crisis, that will be looking at problems never ever thought to be solved in certain ways. And then finally, the one other observation that I've made is I do know a lot of entrepreneurs in this city, and I enjoyed hearing the stories of how they have been pivoting their businesses, how they've been moving into new or adjacent business lines, how they've committed to continuing to employ those within their organizations. So there's been a lot of heartwarming stories in there as well.
That's awesome. What do you see in the next, let's say, several years? I don't know how long mayorship is. How long is it, by the way?
4 years.
4 years. Okay. So what do you see in these 4 years, and what are you building towards? Let's say, what are the years after that you're building towards along with Edmonton? How do you see it flourishing as a city? Your vision for it?
Mm-hmm. Couple of points of my vision for this city. Really, at the highest level, this is a city that works. And when I think about what that works means, it's it's a city that delivers delight to its users. So Edmontonians, as the customer of the city, would say that they are giving it a net promoter score of 10 because they would recommend the services of the city to others. I see a city that works with other organizations, that partners well, because we know that the world's largest problems cannot be solved by one single organization. And so I would like Edmonton to be known as a collaborator with other orders of government. We are the capital city of this province. I would like to have a strong, strong relationship with the government that's in place, so that we can make sure that we're co-investing in this economy. I would like to see an environment for businesses that is enabling, not constraining, not restrictive, not with high friction. I would like to see a city that uses its technology strengths, such as artificial intelligence, that leverages its talent strengths. We have nearly 10% of our population that's enrolled in post-secondary. That's incredible. That's the talent of the future. And so I would like to see a city that retains as much as its talent as possible, so that they see the job opportunities and job potentials here.
That's great. It's fascinating for me, because when I went to Edmonton, it's extremely cold, but the people were very warm. So the contrast, because I come from a very warm environment compared to here, and I chose Vancouver because, like, okay, I looked at Toronto, Vancouver, snow, no snow. It's like, okay, no snow for sure. Funny enough, I live now high in the mountains, so it's very it's very snowy. But yeah, that's one thing that struck me, is that how warm people there, that at least that I met, and how helpful. It's kind of resonating with what you're saying, my experience with that. um how does it, where do you see Edmonton, even though I know your focus is inwards and helping building the city, but can you, through your work through the innovation ecosystem, can you help us understand how does Edmonton kind of position itself in Canada and in the world, if there is such a thing? And what do people, let's say, what's the outside look of Edmonton?
You know, I can answer that a couple of different ways. So first,
Please.
I'll start with where our strengths are in technology. So we are ranked number 3 in the world for artificial intelligence research.
Wow.
I hope that we hold that ranking. I hope that there is an increase of awareness in the reason why we are ranked number 3. I would like to see a lot of that. What I do think is important, though, for Edmonton to recover from this crisis and from COVID is to have an inward focus, for us to be nurturing to our small businesses that are being created here, for us to create the best possible environment for those that choose this city to live in, that want to build families here, that want to stay here. And so I think that what I would say is, for the next 5 years, I'm actually not interested in applying for rankings or external validation. I would like the community to speak for itself. I would like all of us here in Edmonton to be able to raise our hand and say, this is the city that I choose because it is the best environment for me to raise a family, to build a life, to build a business.
That's interesting. The reason I say that is you, it strikes me that you're kind of entrepreneurial and business sense, where let the results speak for themselves. Is that kind of what you're going for here?
Yes, I do think that. And I think that those are the best forms of recognition, is when you're just doing so well and you're not really paying attention to anyone else, that others start to observe you. You get some head snaps of people saying, what's going on there in Edmonton? That's what I want to look for, is that our residents here are the best evangelists for our story. And so as they travel far and wide, when we can do that again, that they're telling our story, and they're the ones that are attracting people to this city through natural recommendations.
Cool. And I this has been a fascinating conversation. I can jump into any of the other points even deeper. One of the things I want to look at is, what has been if you look at your career so far, what has been the milestones that you would say um, made who you are today? Like, what if you kind of acknowledge those moments in time? Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's a role, maybe it's a challenge that made you who you are today, and the person that has this outlook.
I have practiced this idea of a life journey line. And it's one of the things that I learned at Intuit, around the idea that, you're right, the highest and sometimes lowest moments are in our lives are our most defining moments. And so I could talk about a number of life moments, but I will, but I'll focus on my career, because I think that it's I like to share this story. So the 15 years that I spent at Intuit were incredible. They did such an amazing job of preparing me for this next role that I have ambition, and the seat that I have ambition to sit in. And I'll tell you a number of different events that led to that. So high moments were the day that I stood on the balcony of the Intuit building here in Edmonton and realized that in 6 months we had converted a farmer's field with no services, road, power, infrastructure of any kind, into a 100,000 square foot building that would house 450 of Intuit's employees. And we did that in 6 months.
Wow.
And I remember standing on the balcony and thinking, this is probably one of the most incredible points of my career, and I will never do something as amazing as this again. And then followed 15 amazing years at Intuit, where I continued to have these incredible high points that really had the foundation of a yes and mindset. And so Intuit never looked at any problem as impossible. Every challenge was met with yes and how do we continue to expand, and how do we invite more people in that are going to help us to co-create this and make sure that we're successful. Another really incredible moment was the opportunity to be part of the Global Business Division, who was given the mandate to be a bit of an incubator division, where we were tasked with either creating or taking one of Intuit products to the global market. What would be an offering that would have global relevance and global user interest? And then to create a playbook for how you do global market entry at scale. That was an incredible time. We spent about 7 years doing that. I worked with the most amazing group of leaders that I ever hope to work with again. And we were able to claim success and come back to Intuit and say, we have a model to do this. And then during that time, I had the privilege of working with Eric Ries directly. Intuit's a big believer in bringing in world-class leaders to really be immersed within the corporation. And so had the chance to have Eric Ries help us figure out how we become a global organization, and what does minimum viable product look like, and how do you do testing in India and in the farmers markets that are in tiny little villages. It was amazing. And then, finally, again, just on this theme of leadership, Brad Smith, who's the former CEO of Intuit, I could talk about all of the high moments of learning that I had from him. He's incredibly kind and generous, and is one of those leaders that believes that he needs to constantly be teaching, that a leader earns the respect of their teams. And so today I would call myself a practicer, a continued lifelong practicer of the teachings of Brad Smith. So I have so many high moments and many of them that involve leaders that I had the opportunity to work with.
That's excellent.
Look for great mentors. That's there's my one headline. Mentors come in all shapes, sizes, experience, places, mediums, and methods. And the more that you have in your life, the more rich your experience and perspective.
That's awesome. I'm a big believer that it's your defining moments, high and down, that teach you the most about yourself. What, as someone who kind of achieved those big achievements at the time, celebrating them, and also I'm sure there are challenges to get that, like the challenge to get 6 months to get your office that are built in 6 months in a place where you're saying that there's no even facilities and stuff like that, and roads and stuff like that. So what did you learn about yourself that kind of surprised you, or like, I didn't know I'm like this about myself? I'm curious to know.
Well, I agree that it is the low moments and the failures that you learn the most from. And so I definitely look back fondly now on my experience within Innovate Edmonton and the innovation hub idea that I had, that community quickly told me was not the right idea. And I think that the thing that surprised me was how strong my resiliency is, how strong my commitment to persevere. And it's when you've been knocked down, it's tough to get up the next morning and kind of wipe the dirt off your face and go out and face the world again. And so I think for me, the depth of my resiliency, the depth of my perseverance and commitment to hard things really stood out for me. And it surprised me.
Thanks for sharing that. Cheryl, it's been an amazing kind of journey with you to go through the things I don't know. I mean, I had the privilege of meeting you in Edmonton, and you've been very helpful at the time, very warm as well, and very kind person. I kept that. One of the things that I want you to leave us with is key, let's say, 3 key things or learnings that you want to leave people with. Or you might think about it like, hey, if I was to tell myself 20 years ago, here's what I would tell myself, that that know this or learn this or focus on this. What would be 3 things that you would leave us with?
Well, I hearken back to my comment about mentorship would be number one. Really find great leaders and people that are going to support you and help you develop. Look for learnings in all forms that you can. And so my second piece of advice is to take any opportunity presented. And if there are none presented, look for them. And so I did start my career at Intuit as the person that was responsible for being the customer project manager when it came to a construction project. Well, I went on to do many, many other things, and public relations, employee communications, culture, philanthropy, this global business division. And because I looked for opportunities, and so some of them were lateral moves, some of them were entirely different moves. So look for opportunity to learn. The third thing that I will say, while I was born and raised in this city, I think that there's so much to be learned from experiences working in other cities. It's part of the perspective that I bring to my ambition to be mayor, is the contrast of cities that I've worked in, whether it be Singapore, whether it be Bangalore, whether it be Brisbane. There's so much to be learned from external perspective. I tell my 4 kids, travel as much as you possibly can. I suspect at some point you're going to choose Edmonton again to come back to, but go get external perspective. It's so important.
Cheryl, thank you very much. There's a lot of learning, I would say. I am very, very pleased to kind of hear from you and learn about your journey, and get some nuggets of kind of advice and wisdom for myself as well. Thank you very much for being here.
Hussein, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for letting me share as much as I did, and this was great. And I look forward to seeing you when we can travel again. And in the meantime, if there's anything else I can do, please let me know.
Helpful as always. Thank you.